What are you doing here? God, I was supposed to give you work to do today. I know. I'm going to give it to you in this video. You guys are so in trouble. Oh my goodness. Well, in that case, welcome, people. It's time to learn about Canada and World War I. But before we get to that, let me explain what we're doing here. This is something called the flipped classroom. I'm going to give you all the information you need for tomorrow right now in this 9-minute video. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you some information all about Canada and the situation they were in before World War I. I want you to pay attention, take some notes, and at the end there's going to be some questions. Answer the questions in your notebooks, and you can bring them into class tomorrow so that we can have a little bit of discussion about it, and we'll get everything set up. Can you handle that? I think you can. Remember, I be counting on you. I know, it's corny. It's okay. This is Vimy Ridge today. It is located in France, and the large structure you see is a war monument to the Canadian soldiers who fought here in World War I. In this video, we'll examine the end of English Canada. English not in the sense of English speaking, but in the sense of Englishman and empire. This era marked the high point of English-Canadian imperial pride and its decline. World War I shattered the allure of empire, and the post-war years were marked by social upheavals, women's suffrage, and the rise of worker rights. Canada would never be the same. Okay, so what we're going to look at is Canada and empire, or rather, the end of empire. As you can see, in 1897, things were going pretty good for Canada, but maybe it wasn't exactly how people thought. Things were going good because they were part of the British Empire, not because of anything special that the Canadians had done. The relationship between Canada and England was pretty good, but there were some problems. These problems were because of Canada's position in the British Empire. Joseph Chamberlain, he could be a real issue. He was a real strong imperialist. Now, what does that mean? It means somebody who believes in imperialism and who wanted new things from England's colonies. He wants them to draw closer. Now, what does that mean? He means, more close relationships and more activities together. Now, before this, Canada had been acting somewhat independently. Chamberlain believed, now in this age of imperialism, it was time to change this. The Canadian Prime Minister, he constantly said no to that, no matter how hard England pushed. Laurier supported England, but as Canadian Prime Minister, he was going to protect Canadian rights, even if it meant personal cost. Some people always have to be wise guys. Canada is in an interesting place in the late 1890s. They love England, but they really like the idea of independence. And there were a couple of major things that came up that really illustrated these problems, including the Boer War and something called a tin pot navy. Now here's one of those situations where you IB students are like, why did I take IB? Because now you have to hear about the Boer War, something no one else in Linden High School is learning about. Now next year, when you're seniors, you'll hear a little bit more about the Boer War. And the Boer War takes place in South Africa. 1899, it's the colonists, the British colonists in South Africa against the Boers, who were descendants of the original Dutch settlers. So while we were making our own empire, the British were having problems with theirs because of imperialism. Now, what did this have to do with Canada? That's a good question. And the reality is? Not much. But are you sure? Right? Yes, I'm sure. It had nothing to do with Canada. Wait. I'm confused. I'm an IB student. Why are you telling me about stuff that doesn't have to do with what we're talking about? 'Cause not everybody in Canada thought so. French Canadians, they wanted no part of it, and they saw it as an imperialistic military venture. That leaves our English Canadians, and guess what? They supported England. Remember, Canada had also been a colony of the French, so there are French Canadians and there are English Canadians. Laurier compromised. He let English Canadians decide what they wanted to do, and if they wanted to volunteer and go and fight, he could do it. It was the first time Canadians had fought overseas. So two things are happening here. If Canadians are going to go and fight overseas for the British Empire, that's going to show their connection to that empire. But on the other hand, a gulf is widening between the French Canadians and the British Canadians, which is a sign of the desire for independence. Now, this wasn't the only problem between Canada and England. There was also a little bit of an issue about their navy. Again, as England put pressure on Canada to move closer and establish tighter relations with England, one of the things that came up was about the British Navy. We already know that Germany had a big influence on naval thought in the early 1900s. As Germany built up its military, the British got worried about that. They wanted to build their navy as well, including a series of powerful battleships. And they wanted Canada to pitch in. They wanted Canada to build up its navy as part of the overall British fleet. Again, Laurier compromised. He came up with his own plan. Canada would build its own navy, one that would be at England's disposal if ever there was going to be a war. But that's the problem with compromising all the time. Everyone is always unhappy, and nobody was satisfied with this. French Canadians said he went too far. They were too close to England. At this little break in the audio, you might wonder, where did the British and the Germans get this idea about increasing naval strength? Our friend Alfred T. Mahan. And of course, our English Canadian friends, well, they didn't think he went far enough. Food for thought. If a politician never makes anyone happy, what happens to that politician? And he was criticized by these English nationalists. And his plan for a navy was called the Tin Pot Navy. Laurier's plan was to build a series of small warships, not battleships. That's why it was called a Tin Pot Navy. Unfortunately for the Prime Minister, the name Tin Pot Navy stuck. The Boer War and the Tin Pot Navy, along with Laurier's political platform of free trade with the United States, caused big problems, and he was defeated in the 1911 elections. Free trade with America would mean more business for Canada, but it would soon be overwhelmed by American industrial production. With the defeat of Wilfrid Laurier in the 1911 elections, Robert Borden would become the new Prime Minister of Canada. And it was going to be up to Mr. Borden to lead Canada through some of its most difficult times. Soon, World War I would break out, and Canada, as part of the British Empire, would have to do its part.